Join me in the kitchen as I make dinner for my family. I'm starting dinner today actually around breakfast time because I'm gonna need to feed my starter in order to make the pie crusts. I'm gonna be using hard red wheat to feed my starter, but it really doesn't matter, just whatever grain you prefer to use. I know some recipes call for a certain amount of hydration for your starter, but I prefer for just about everything to have a thick consistency. If my starter is runny at all, I feel like it doesn't work as well. I actually cleaned my favorite starter jar, so it's nice and ready for me to feed it heavily. I'm just going to take maybe a few tablespoons of my starter into this clean jar. I'm going to put a few cups of flour and not equal parts water, but close to. I want this to be a pretty thick pancake like batter consistency. My starter is about 2 years old, so it's pretty well established and rises within a few hours. So, depending on what I'm doing, I just get up early and feed my starter, or the night before, I will feed my starter if I want to get dough going early in the morning. In this case, I am going to feed my starter early in the morning, and then by midday, I'm going to be preparing my doughs. This is about the consistency that I look for, and then I'm going to cover this with a cloth cover and put this in a warm spot to rise while I do my other tasks today. Alright, so a few hours later, I'm going to be milling some wheat. This is soft white wheat. It is the closest to all purpose or bread flour. This is a great way to get that pie crust that you're used to, but with the health benefits of the whole grain. And I'm not even gonna lie to you, I totally messed up the order of making this pie crust, but this is an example that most mistakes in the kitchen can be fixed. After I milled that grain, I actually should have put the sugar and the salt into that flour mixture and combined all the dry ingredients before adding the wet ingredients. I've seen some people shred the butter into the dry ingredients with a cheese grater. I feel like that is so hard to clean, so I prefer just to cut frozen butter into the dry ingredients. This is my favorite way to do it, and it only takes a minute or so. So, after cutting up my butter, what you should do is you cut it into the flour mixture, and this will help create those flaky layers into the pie crust. But I poured my sourdough starter right into that mixture before, so hear me out. First, get your flour, salt, sugar, mix those together, cut in your butter, then add the sourdough starter. Don't do what you see me doing here. Because I messed up the order of this, I did have to do a little bit of hand mixing, but like I said, it came together just fine. When you've been working in the kitchen for quite a while, you can improvise and figure out a way around your mistakes. Now, with pie crusts or biscuits or anything like that, you really don't want the butter to melt. So, what was hard about this was that I was trying to move quickly and not knead the dough. When you knead it, it will melt the butter. If you knead the dough at all, it will melt the butter and it will be so hard to handle. So, I just decided I'm going to pour this out onto the counter and I'm going to try to shape it the best I can. This dough will be shaggy and there will be chunks of butter. You want that. This is also a large amount of dough because this is actually a triple recipe. I am going to be making chicken pot pie for dinner, and whenever I make something that is easily frozen, I make a double batch so that I can have a extra meal in the freezer anytime a busy night comes up. I really love when I do this and I think ahead. I did this when I had my baby. For about a month before I had her, I just made a bunch of extra meals on top of what I was already making, so it didn't really feel like extra work because you just double whatever you're making. So I'm making two chicken pot pies, and I'm also making pie crust because I'm going to be making cream pies for a family get together. So this is 6 pie crusts. So whenever I make anything baking or even when I make granola bars, I just love to make a double batch. It makes my busy life a lot easier. All right, so I'm going to chop up my vegetables. This is my favorite part. It's so satisfying to see the end result. I love with pot pies or any type of meat pie. Just use whatever you have on hand. I had the perfect ingredients for this, but if I didn't, I could always do a ground beef pie with sweet potatoes or beans or whatever you have. It's a great way to improvise, come up with a quick meal, and to not be wasteful with the ingredients you already have. So for this recipe, I'm using celery, carrots, onions, garlic, and potatoes. Now, I know a lot of people prefer to use the garlic in the jar. Let me tell you, you need to stop doing that. No judgment here. I know it's a lot easier and more convenient, but once you get in the habit of using fresh garlic, you will not know any other way. You'll just get used to it and your food will taste a million times better. I think it's also cheaper and healthier just to get bulbs of garlic. They add a additive into the jar to keep it fresh, and we don't want any unnecessary additives. My mom actually grows this garlic in her garden, so this is really good quality fresh garlic with great flavor. But even if you can't, you could always source local garlic, or I get some from Azure Standard sometimes. Just try to get a good quality garlic. Garlic is really good for you and adds so much flavor to your meals, so I put it in just about everything. If you want to make it even easier, you can get one of those gadgets where you put the whole clove in it and it just smashes it down. But stop buying the stuff in the jar. Trust me, it'll change your life. So, when I was doing this, I was actually doing a partial prep process because I had to run to the store when my husband got home from work. So I thought, okay, what can I do to help set myself up for success? Because the evenings always get busy, especially with little kids and baby who wants to be held. So I just like to do whatever I can in little pockets of time. So I got all of my vegetables chopped up. And what's nice, if you chop up your onions and garlic, it kind of breaks down those acids, I think is what they are, to make it so it's easier to digest and also doesn't burn your eyes as much when you're cooking them. I think a lot of times us moms can have an all or nothing mindset. If I can't get a whole task done, then I might as well not start. And I would caution against that, especially when you are living in a season like I am where you just never know when things are going to go crazy. Do what you can and don't stress about the rest. So I already have my pie crusts ready, and now I have my vegetables chopped, and I'll get back to dinner in a little bit. All right, so this is a little bit later, and I'm getting back to making dinner. I'm adding some beef fat from my bone broth that I made a few days ago. This is a really nice way to cook your vegetables in some healthy fat and save money. Just use the fat that rises to the top when you make bone broth. I'm going to let my vegetables saute and soften in this pan, and in another cast iron pan, I actually pulled out some frozen bone broth because I had already used my fresh bone broth the day before to make soup. I like to freeze any extra bone broth I have so that when I'm making a meal, I have some great nutrition to add into a meal instead of just using bouillon or water. So I pulled out about 2 cups of bone broth out of the freezer, and those are thawing in the back pan. While my vegetables are sauteing and that broth is thawing, I'm going to cut up some potatoes. I like to cut these up quite small because I noticed that the potatoes take the longest to cook through in the bone broth mixture, and I want these to be fully cooked. Nobody wants a hard potato in their chicken pot pie. So I'm going to add these potatoes in, let them start to cook a little bit and get a little bit brown, and season these really well. I use salt, pepper, onion, and garlic. Even though I already had fresh onion and garlic, you need more. And then I'm just going to give these a few more minutes to soften and those onions to turn translucent. And I'm going to start working on my chicken. Ideally, I would have had my chicken cooked in advance, but I didn't. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using chicken breast. I prefer to use a whole chicken just because it's cheaper and tastes better, but that's okay. You just do what you got. So, I'm going to season these chicken breasts with the same seasonings: salt, pepper, onion, and garlic. And I'm going to sear these on both sides. Searing it will help lock in the moisture. The worst thing is having dried chicken. And then I'm just going to throw this in the oven and let the chicken finish cooking all the way through while I prepare the rest of my chicken pot pie. I think I cooked this chicken at 400 degrees for about 15 to 20 minutes. You could also cut these thinner, and that will make it cook faster. Alright, so while my chicken is cooking, my broth is ready. I'm gonna come back to my vegetable mixture. I'm gonna add some Italian seasoning, mix this up, and then I'm going to add some flour in here. You could use freshly milled, but for stuff like this, I just prefer to have a good quality flour on hand. So I'm gonna sprinkle that on top, and then I'm going to slowly start mixing in my bone broth. This will help thicken up the vegetable mixture, but you don't want to pour in the bone broth too quickly because it will break up that roux that you created with the fat and the flour. I love being able to put bone broth in this recipe because it adds great flavor and such great nutrition. I like to have bone broth on hand all the time because you can really put it in just about anything. So we're putting it in our chicken pot pie, you can put it in your soup, your stews, your rice, you can cook noodles in it. Adds protein, gelatin and collagen, amino acids. It's just an amazing staple, and I think a lot of people get intimidated because they don't know how to do it. But really, you just simmer it in a pot with some water. I do mine in the Instapot. It's really quick and easy, and it's such a cheap way to add nutrition into your family's diet. All right, so while the vegetables are simmering in this bone broth, I'm also going to add in some frozen peas. You could use fresh or canned, but this is what I had. Then I'm going to turn the heat down to low and let this cook all the way through, and I'm going to work on my pie crusts. All right, so I'm going to flour the countertop and divide my pie crusts. This recipe is usually only 2 pie crusts, but because I'm making a double batch, I have 4. And then I'm going to put the other 2 back in the fridge for when I make my cream pies. Could weigh these to make sure that they are all evenly proportionate, but I don't care. I just eyeball it. It's not really that big of a deal. Like I said earlier, with any type of dough like this, you do want to move quickly so the butter doesn't melt. So as I'm rolling out these pie crusts, the ones that I'm not using, I'm going to put back into that bag and keep them in the fridge to make sure that they are cold. So these pie crusts don't need to be rolled out perfectly. I would just start by taking the dish that you are going to put these in and measure out how big they need to be. Most pie dishes are for 9 to 10-inch pies. So after you roll it out, just put it on top of the pan you're going to use, see if it fits. If not, just lay it back down and roll it out more. It's not very exact. You just want it to be a good even circle or square in my case for this disposable tin pan that I used. If you measure it correctly, you shouldn't have any excess dough on the sides, but that's okay because if you happen to have one side that's too long or too short, you can just add the excess from the one side onto the short side and just roll it out to make it even again. Making pies is definitely a skill and you will get better at it as you practice. And mine aren't even perfect either. It's okay. Your family will still love it. Just practice and you'll get better, I promise. Right, so after greasing this pan with a little bit of oil, I'm going to add my pie crust. I'm going to press down the sides and kind of crimp the edges. It doesn't need to be perfect. Then I'm going to put this in the fridge so that it stays cold and I'm going to finish my vegetable mixture. These vegetables have had time to cook through, so I'm going to add the cream in and I'm going to pull out my chicken and make sure it's done. So there are 2 ways that I like to go about cutting up my chicken. In this video, I just sliced it and cut it into chunks because that's what my toddlers prefer. I feel like toddlers have a lot of sensory overload and mine at least don't like shredded chicken, which is too bad because it's actually a lot easier to put this in your stand mixer and get the whisk attachment and it will shred it in like 30 seconds. But that's okay. We had cubed chicken with this. It only took a little bit longer. So after cutting this up, I'm going to add this back into the pan and mix this up really well and get my other cast iron pan ready to put my pie crust in. Now, if you're going to be using a cast iron pan, you want to make sure that it is well seasoned so that it doesn't stick. I use my cast iron pans every day and I make sure to clean them and season them properly so that they can stay non-stick. So I just put a little layer of tallow on this pan, put my pie crust in, the same thing that I did with the other one, but this is a circle shape. Then I'm going to start filling my pie crust with that vegetable mixture. In making pies, you don't want to overload the pie crust with the mixture because it could spill over as it bakes. So start off little and add more as needed. Alright, now I'm going to add the crust on top and press this down and crimp the edges. As you can see, I don't worry too much about crimping it, but you want to make sure that the two crusts are at least touching so that the mixture doesn't spill out. Then I'm going to score the top of this just to give it some cut vents for the steam to escape and avoid the pie crust from getting soggy. And then I'm going to put this in the oven at about 425 for about 30 to 40 minutes just until it gets golden brown on top. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this one that goes in the freezer, but I'm not going to cook this one. I'm just going to put this in the fridge and let this cool down. And then I'm going to cover it and put it in the freezer and pull it out when I need an easy dinner. And there you have it. Homemade delicious chicken pot pie that is nourishing and your family will definitely love it. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like, leave a comment letting me know what kind of videos you'd like to see from me, and I hope you'll stick around and subscribe.